Hi everyone. This is Belle with Pop Culture Uncovered.
Hi,
And
Belle.
I'm here with Pete, as you can tell. And Pete took one for the team this week
Man.
because Pete watched the Brat Pack documentary. And let's just say he came away from it feeling a type of way.
Man. So this was an interesting experiment. Brats, first of all, terrible name. But Brats has been making kind of, the pop culture rounds for all of us. I think, all of us of a certain generation, this one, being, seeing, our peers watching this movie and having opinions about it. This being the documentary that Andrew McCarthy put together about the Brat Pack. At least that was my initial thought. It is essentially about how he feels about being called a member of the Brat Pack, or about the term the Brat Pack specifically. And so that really flavored the whole documentary, which he essentially wrote, produced, is based on his book, where he also goes into talking about how he feels a certain way about being called a member of the Brat Pack. And so it was a lot, and I'm not really sure how to feel about what I watched, Val.
Well, first of all, that name is terrible because I literally immediately assumed it was some sort of documentary about the Brat dolls. Well, for me, I had no interest in watching it at all. And the reason is that these people never really. So these people and the characters they play were not really a part of my lexicon growing up. So, I know who the members of the Brat Pack are because you would have to be living under a rock to not know if you're of our age or older. But I was willing to give it a try until you started telling me about it. And then I was like, oh, good. I'm glad I didn't miss anything. But there were some good things about it. So let's start with, first of all, who he actually spoke with.
Right. So he, at the beginning of the film, we get him in sort of a weird, rambly kind of mood about how he feels about being called, member of the Brat Pack. And without anyone else, without any sort of context, this is part of the problem with this documentary, is it features just a lot of him just sort of expressing his feelings and trying to work through this. He's already written a book, so it felt like, in a way, like he was sort of just artificially recreating it, because I feel like if once you've written a book about it and been through therapy, as he alludes to, that you would be in a place to better communicate how you feel about things. But this was not the case. It was just a lot of rambling and some really weird choices of music. And he eventually starts, reaching out. There's a lot of talk about doing the documentary before we finally get the montage of phone calls of him calling up the people that he does talk to, and the people who noticeably weren't in it. So first, I'll just say Molly Ringwald, Judd Nelson did not participate, even though they are mentioned quite a bit for people who don't, even show up as a surprise in this movie. He does talk to Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, Demi Moore, Rob Lowe, and a few other folks who had worked, on these films. David Bloom, John Cryer, Leah Thompson, and Timothy Hutton, sort of outliers to the main Brat Pack, the outer circle or whatever. They also speak, and it would be really interesting, Val. Like, these are actors that I'm really interested in. I've always liked Timothy Hutton. Rob Lowe, is just sort of a weird mystery. Demi Moore, has been famous forever. Emilio Estevez, who doesn't love the Mighty Ducks? Ali Sheedy, like so many of these actors got to be on Psych. But the problem is that instead of being a film that is centered around the experience of this, collective of actors. I don't know if we could call them an inner circle. Andrew McCarthy would kind of prefer that I not call them that. So, this group of actors who apparently didn't hang out nearly as much as we were led to believe, and that's bothersome. Uh, they they all seem really interesting, but we never really get to hear how they feel about things because he gathers them together, he sits with them, we get these sit downs, but they're not being interviewed by a professional interviewer. They are being interviewed by Andrew McCarthy, who really just wants people to agree with him and is so, again, offended by this term Brat Pack that he I had hoped to start the whole section over and lost. I hoped this would be a movie where we actually got to talk, and I had hoped this would be a movie where we would learn a little bit about the Brat Pack, you know, them hanging out, them not hanging out, all the things that they did. It, even if they didn't spend all their time together, I feel like that's part of the frustration that he has with everything. But instead, every single person he sits down with, he just talks over. He spends so much time like repeating the same thing that we've heard him say in other conversations with other actors. But then the second that they start talking, and I'm like, okay, well, we're going to hear from Demi Moore. We're going to get Rob Lowe's opinion. We're going to get Ali Sheedy. And Emilio Estevez, the most. Andrew McCarthy just talks over them, interrupts them, like they get going, and it seems like a lot of them, Demi Moore, Rob Lowe in particular, are just trying to kind of talk him off the ledge, like being like, this is a positive, like this. Yes, this was a frustrating thing. We all felt, it was reductive, and we were all kind of upset by being called Rat Pack. But at the same time, like it helped us be part of something that defined people. I mean, people who are pop culture writers um and people who do columns and videos and podcasts were also folks that he talked to, and they're also trying to explain to him that, like, yes, maybe it felt like you lost opportunities because of being called a Brat Packer. You felt like you weren't being taken seriously as an actor because you're being called a member of the Brat Pack. But at the same time, and maybe it felt like your career was negatively affected, but at the same time, like, you're part of this lexicon of, like, you're part of the zeitgeist of people who grew up adoring these 80s movies. Like you, it wasn't really a part of my 80s movie life. I really didn't watch, and I didn't identify with the Brat Pack very much until I got to like late high school, college, and even some of my early adulthood, where I was like, this and some of those movies being about people in their 20s, I watched them when I was in my 20s, after they had come out, years after they had come out, and then I kind of identified. But it was like weird watching them try to explain to him how important these movies were. They were like, the soundtracks of these movies were important. The characters, are you a Ducky? Are you Team Blaine? Are you and it felt like, it felt strange to see him trying to comprehend that, because it almost felt like he was acting like somebody who had written a book essentially, the same as this movie, and who had, who had all the therapy talk, was somehow still seemed puzzled and awed by the notion that, being a member of the Brat Pack wasn't a negative thing. And that was the oddest, weirdest thing about this documentary, is you have these interesting people who seem like almost like they have just been dragged into a situation where they are the armchair, therapist for Andrew McCarthy and his frustration and anger. The author of the article, um, makes an appearance and has a conversation. It's sort of like, man, it's not that big a deal. Like, you're a member of the Brat Pack. How cool is that? Other members of the Brat Pack, Demi Moore is like, why were we so offended? Rob Lowe is like, it's a cool thing. Like, and there's Andrew McCarthy still like clinging to to whatever shred of the narrative he's sort of stuck on, being like, uh, are we going to be called the Brat Pack forever? And they're like, Rob Lowe's like looking at it. We're like, we're in our 60s. Of course we are. Like, that, if that hasn't stopped now, it's never going to stop. With the exception of Leah Thompson, I felt like every single person was trying to like bring some levity, some sanity, some perspective to Andrew McCarthy and his sort of pet frustration. I won't speak to like what one person's trauma is versus another person's trauma, but it just seemed like there was a missed opportunity to have a different kind of conversation, to make a different kind of movie, and to still tell that part of the narrative. To talk about all the things that we did and like that impact that it made. Like it could be a completely positive movie and then move into the trauma aspect or move into the parts that like make you sad, make you angry, make you frustrated. I had always thought that Andrew McCarthy was the guy who like of all the Brat Packers who like checked out and went off and did his own thing and didn't bother thinking about it. Like you never see him like even Molly Ringwald and yeah, even Molly Ringwald and then Judd Nelson, the two who didn't make it into the film, like even they will cash in on the sort of the Brat Pack thing. It was just 20 years ago, but Molly Ringwald in a Not Another Teen Movie, for example. And so it's not like they're averse to it. But I almost felt glad for them that they didn't participate in this because it was just like, would you like to be called up, visited at your house, and yelled at by Andrew McCarthy until you say something that he moderately agrees with, so that then he can shout how much he agrees with you? It just, I had kind of seen him as the guy who walked away and got over it all, and it couldn't have been further from the truth. So it was kind of bummy because I just didn't enjoy seeing him in that state, to see him be that frustrated, upset, and angry uh, in a way that almost felt like he was missing the point. And it also felt like 6 hours long. It was an hour and 32 minutes. It was one of the shortest documentaries I've seen this year, and yet somehow it just dragged. And that's the bummer of it all.
It's interesting you should say that, because what I'm hearing is that Rob and Demi and Judd and Molly and John Cryer and Timothy took this thing and used it as a stepping stone to other things. And that is why those five specifically have worked pretty steadily for the last 30 years, 40 years. Oh my God. 30 years? Yeah. Oh my God. Because to a lesser extent, I keep thinking about the fact that Michael J. Fox and there's someone else who I was thinking of who were also tangentially a part of that crowd. And those people continue to work and continue to try different things. And what I'm hearing is that Andrew McCarthy is really angry that he didn't have the opportunities. But the question is it because they weren't there, or is it because of your attitude?
That's the thing, is I can't speak on that because I thought he was a pretty talented guy in the movies that he was in, and or at least he had that. Like I liked him in Less Than Zero. I thought it was like, wow, you this is kind of a more grown up role. I thought him in St. Elmo's Fire was everyone was kind of there. Like I guess if I look at those movies, I'm like, Demi Moore's not that great. And I'm like, Tom Cruise in some of those like Brat Pack, even though he's of that generation but not in the pack. There were movies then that I was like, that guy's, like you didn't really know who was going to be big and who wasn't. And so he seemed just as capable as anyone else. And I think it does come down to luck as much as anything else. But I mean, he didn't stick around, and it does feel like he just kind of took himself off the board more than he was taken off. I mean, look at John Cryer. I wouldn't have called John Cryer's career successful in 1996 or 7. It's like, oh, he's a working actor. He used to be, in Brat Pack movies, but now he's doing this thing. And then Two and a Half Men came along, and now he's a gazillionaire. And same thing with Rob Lowe. Like Rob Lowe's career, he managed to tank that with all of his crappy behavior. But then Parks and Rec comes along. It's all a matter of if they did this, would it have changed? If they did that, would it have changed? If Demi Moore hadn't done A Few Good Men, what would have changed for her? would she have been in G.I. Jane and like all the other stuff that, she just kind of ruled the late 90s. And so I don't know what would have become of Andrew McCarthy, but it just feels that him having such strong feelings about it now makes me feel like in the 90s, it must have just crushed him. And I don't know that it was interesting enough to go on what just felt like I felt like at the end, I told Rosa, I was like, I feel like I should bill him for this therapy session. I feel like we should collectively bill him 2 hours for being part of this strange therapy session. And the part that is a bummer about it to me was that it wasn't even interesting because the interesting people he yells over, interrupts as they're trying to explain to him that it's not in a lot of cases it's not that big a deal.
Well, you said something earlier that was really interesting because you said he was the one interviewing. And my question is, I wonder how much better this would have been had there been a professional interviewer, someone like Anderson Cooper, someone from their age group who had Ronan Farrow would have been great for this.
It would have been
So
interesting. Yeah.
so that's the question. And it's also, and look, clearly there was a lot of trauma associated with that time period because that is the time period where we also had the Coreys. And we all know what happened with Corey Haim, Corey Feldman. Um, Andrew Barrymore, she was younger, but she was also one of those people who went through it during that time period. So I guess what I'm wondering is that if we is there anything salvageable about this thing that could possibly make me want to watch it in any way?
No, the only thing I would do is read an article about it because there are a handful of really interesting quotes from the people he interviews. But to get to them, you have to kind of slog through this interview. And look, not everyone's cut out for it, but he wrote this thing, he directed this thing, he planned this thing out. We're watching the creative process, or we're watching it be fabricated and recreated. But either way, that's the whole part of that's the narrative he's giving us. And and it's tricky, right? Because how long I don't know how else I don't know who else could have interviewed them because at some point they would have had to interview him. So you're just kind of hoping like okay, you're just hoping that he'll be a good interview. You're hoping he can ask objective questions or at least ones that where he's not trying to answer them as he's asking. And that's the problem. It's like he'll say something. He shortcuts everything. He shows up, introduced, sees these people he hasn't seen in 30 years, and it's like, oh, this is so important and so healthy, and so like you're my best friend now. Like it's that kind of energy. Not that that's what he was saying, but it's that kind of energy of like you're trying to rush to these conclusions. You're trying to rush to this like um yeah, you're trying to rush to this sort of finish line of, oh, we've talked all this stuff through. And it felt like unfinished. Basically, every conversation we see just feels like the people he interviewed never got a chance to share their perspective, never got a chance to finish half the thoughts that they were saying because he was jumping on them, talking over them, and and just kind of looking for them to say one thing that he agreed with wholeheartedly. And then he's, just top of his lungs, yes, exactly. It's that. And that's no way to that's no way to run a conversation. And it's edited poorly because we get all of that. And so at every one of those scenes, the director, makes himself the subject of the film more unlikable, more uncharismatic, more of an annoyance because those lengthy scenes where he's just talking over people don't end. They don't get edited. They don't I mean, I guess there's something to be said for like good job making giving yourself an unflattering picture, a realistic and unflattering picture of yourself. But it was just, and the music choices were odd for all the music that could have been chosen. It just sort of felt like, dad's play mix. our dad's playlist of songs that were just kind of there. We're just kind of saccharine and there, interspersed with people being like, "Oh yeah, the music in the '80s and these Brat Pack movies was so important too," and then you get songs that really don't reflect that. So the whole way through, it was just I wanted more, and I wanted completely different than what it was that he had in, and so that was Bratz. So yeah, I didn't know what to think about it. It was one of those movies where you see people defend it on social media, and you're like, "What is wrong with you?" And then like, I gotta watch this. So if your mileage may vary, whoever. So yeah, for our listeners, your mileage may vary, but to me, it just there were more interesting stories that I wanted to hear about, and none of them came out in that movie.
Well, that is exactly the ringing endorsement that I feel this film deserves, which is a shame because, as you said, it was a great opportunity to unpack. I keep thinking about how Robert Downey Jr. was tangentially a member of that team as well, and Anthony Michael Hall was also there, and apparently he was not in this. So
no, he barely came up.
Yeah, which is crazy because he has also had a pretty decent career and is literally just was in a film last year. To instead of being grateful and leaning into it and doing things and taking chances, you made a choice to instead be angry about one article that was written and then hold on to that anger and bitterness for the rest of your life. And again, I don't know all of his trauma because so far it seems to me that even though he wrote a book and did a documentary, you still don't actually know anything. But
beyond that, beyond
him being angry. Yes. So, but it seems to me that how you deal with the opportunities given to you is completely up to you. And it sounds like he didn't do great with making the proper choices, and now he's forever bitter. But that could be just me. But on that note, this is Belle with Pop Culture Uncovered. We have just talked about the Brat Pack. If you guys want to see, if you are of the younger generation who doesn't know anything about what a Brat Pack is, feel free to go check out About Last Night or The Breakfast Club or The Outsiders, which is amazing and just opened on Broadway and won a Tony 3 days ago at the time of this taping. Won a Tony for the Broadway revival of said book and film, or Pretty in Pink or St. Elmo's Fire. And in the in between time, try to take the opportunities that are presented to you and do the best with the situation. And don't hold bitterness in your heart. It doesn't do you any good in the long run, and the only person you're really hurting is yourself. We love you. We'll see you at the next few cons that are coming up. Peace.